Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is our third Nautical Nights presentation of the 2022 winter season. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. For those of you who haven't joined our Nautical Nights series this way, you are welcome to share your comments, questions in the YouTube chat. For those of you who aren't able to access the chat or aren't familiar with it, you're very welcome to send any comments or questions through to our email, marmus@marmuseum.ca. I will put that email address in the chat. So that's marmus@marmuseum.ca. We're very happy to have a member of KYC joining us this evening. As some of you know, KYC is, I think, the Kingston Yacht Club is a partner in this Nautical Nights program. So I will very welcome to bring Rob Truthers, Commodore at KYC, to the screen. Over to you, Rob. You have to unmute first.
Hello. Good evening, everyone, to all those viewing the Nautical Nights presentation of the Museum of the Great Lakes this evening. My name is Robert Truthers. I'm the current Commodore of the Kingston Yacht Club. Michelle has been kind enough to allow me a few moments at the beginning of this evening's presentation to express our appreciation of the close relationship we have between our two organizations. Many of our KYC members share a strong appreciation and enthusiasm for the work of the museum, and I know the members of both organizations share a love for this environment and the history of human activities in the Kingston area and on these wonderful Great Lakes. I've been anticipating this evening's topic of stories from Wolfe Island, as my family has many memories of living on Wolfe Island, particularly in the summertime. And although I haven't shared it with Brian, he may know that we snuck on without getting paid, paying our fare many times by sneaking around the back of the Wolfe Islander too. Anyway, thank you very much, Michelle. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Rob. There we go. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us and taking part in our Nautical Nights speaker series. It's now in its 5th year, and we're very excited to be able to continue to offer this program through the pandemic in partnership with the Kingston Yacht Club. We are hoping to resume to an in-person delivery, hopefully in the second half of the series, because if anyone's been paying attention, there's actually a month difference between this presentation and the next one. So please just keep an eye on our website and your email to make sure that you don't miss the switch to in-person if and when that's possible. So as for anyone who didn't catch the news last night, I'm Michelle Clairvaux, the Programs and Communications Manager at the museum, and I'm very happy to welcome you this evening. Before we get started, I just wanted to say a few words about the land and water that we interact with as a marine museum. The waterways and land located within the Great Lakes catchment area have a long history predating the establishment of European settlements. The waterways in particular are to be acknowledged as the traditional trade routes of Indigenous peoples, together providing a network of trade and travel routes essential to communities since time immemorial. The Marine Museum of the Great Lakes, Cataraqui, acknowledges the site it sits on and the water it interacts with to be the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat of the 5 Nations Iroquois Confederacy. We thank these nations for their care and stewardship over this land and water, and we are committed to sharing this stewardship moving forward. The Kingston Dry Dock National Historic Site is actually partially situated on what is traditionally known as Mississauga Point, an early seasonal trade settlement of the Mississauga and Algonquin peoples. Industry and time have since changed the shape of this geographic landmark. The piers now located at the site are largely landfilled and greatly altered the original waterline. As such, they have become an extension of Mississauga Point. If you want to find out more, I invite you to join for one of our guided tours of our National Historic Site. Take a look at our website. But enough about that. On to our introduction to our speaker this evening, Brian Johnson, local captain and ferry aficionado. Brian is recently retired after 35 years as a captain of the Wolfe Islander 3 ferry, and after 40 years with the Ontario Ministry of Transportation, Eastern Region Ferries. A certified master, 500-year coastal certificate of competency, Brian has spent more than 50 years in his trade. A writer of sorts and an amateur historian, Brian was the founding president of the Wolfe Island Historical Society in 2006. He continues to serve as a director on the board, contributing to Windward, the annual journal of the Wolfe Island Historical Society, featuring historical events and people living or who have lived on Wolfe Island. During his time, he co-edited a book titled Growing Up on Wolfe Island with Sarah Sorensen, which is a compilation of stories and adventures of dangerous ice crossings and life around his father's time, 1920 to 1960. Although I'm sure there's some of those stories will probably be told again this year. He was also relief captain for the St. Lawrence Cruise Line's Canadian Empress, visiting various historic ports from Kingston to Quebec City on the St. Lawrence River and Kingston, Ottawa on the Ottawa River. Retired from that as well, he spends his times nowadays continuing to write stories of the folks he has met, both aboard and along the waterfront ports of the St. Lawrence River over the years. And of course, finally finishing his biggest project of all, Fairy Tales from Wolfe Island, the title of this presentation. Almost 25 years in the making, this is a collection of stories involving getting to and from the biggest island in 1,000 Islands over a period of 300 years. From 1673 to 2008. While the book might be classed as historical fiction, it is based on actual facts with actual people, based on historical essays, ferry logbooks, family diaries and scrapbooks, newspaper articles and recollections. And so I'm pretty sure it's fair to say that we're all very excited to hear about the stories of Wolfe Island and how we've shared that connection on land and on the island through Expect the Ferries. So I invite Brian to join us on the screen. And for anyone who's just joined, please pay attention and we'll share the information on the YouTube chat about how you can engage afterwards with Brian. Over to you, Brian.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, everyone, for inviting me tonight to ride back and forth from Kingston to Wolfe Island. We're going to go back a couple of years, actually a lot more than a couple of years, way, 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 way back. And one favorite question, which I detest, don't you ever get bored going back and forth? Well, you tell me, you ask me that same question about an hour from now. And we'll see. A lot of things have happened in 1 league or 3 nautical miles between Kingston and, I can't pronounce it. I'm going to pronounce it the Haudenosaunee Ganacosnatusque. And if Dr. Brennan is listening, I'd be shot. But that's the Haudenosaunee pronunciation of Wolfe Island. It became Grand Isle, Ile du Bois, Long Island standing up, and named after General Wolfe. Okay, well, hang on to your seats. The ride can get a little rough. It's a long way. There's going to be pictures. If you've attended before, we've added, I think, between Shauna Kingston and I, probably another 80 pictures. 80 pictures. So hang on. And my assistant will make sure I don't dwell on one too awful long. So buckle your seatbelts, folks. The boat leaves now. Okay.
Looks good.
Different vessels here. You're going to see every one of them and a few more. I can just click on it, make it go down. Yeah, here we go. So I remember when we put this up as a screensaver, when I did a talk one evening, once upon a time, someplace, everyone said, "Where's that?" And I said, "Well, that's Kingston Harbor." No, I mean, where? Right out Kingston Harbor. And the Wolfe Islander behind the gentleman. Well, what's the boat? The Wolfe Islander. People couldn't get through their heads, the younger folk, that there was actually one before the present Wolfe Islander 3. And there was one before that, and there were several before that. So that's back in the mid-1950s. This is the late Captain Elwood Woodman. He was mate, and many of these photographs are from Captain Elwood Buck Mullen, who kept a running record of daily life on the ferry. A very good friend, a teacher, mentor of mine. Both of these gentlemen were, Captain Woodman. But let's go way back. Here's the making of the first boat on Point Peninsula, on which is now Brophy's Point, a dugout canoe. This is an actual dugout at the South Bay Museum. And a couple of years later, that was the main means of transportation of the Haudenosaunee people back and forth. I thought it was birch bark canoe. I was corrected. It was a dugout canoe on the actual big river and the lakes. So a little view of Kingston Harbor here. An outward view of the DeWitt map. You can see Kingston Ferry on the American side, Grand Isle, and the townships of Pittsburgh, Kingston, and Ernestown. This is an up-to-date view of Carleton Island from Millens Bay, or Port Putnam, as it was known back in the day. It's still known historically by the Americans when they captured Fort Haldimand from the British garrison, but the fort had been abandoned by then, and there were only a couple of old guys just looking after the door. So anyway, it went back to the US. Different ferries were operated, and if you can read this, because I can't, but in here, about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about the 10th line down, Andrew Dennick had the ferry from Kingston to Wolfe Island, and Thomas Davis had the ferry from Wolfe Island to Kingston. And these were bateau boats. I won't go into them because that's a separate topic all of its own. But these vessels would be, whoops, I'll go back here, could carry, as long as the ferry could carry at least 2 oxen, a cart, freight, and a couple of people, they were allowed to run. See a couple more of them. These were the little agreements from the different ferry operators. Evan Bennett, don't try to read it. I haven't been able to yet. Another one from Amos Ansley. He had the ferry for some time. The Hitchcock family, who were one of the Empire loyalists coming north. Another view of Cataraqui, spelt almost like today, and the old Fort Frontenac in 1783. I don't think it's an actual photograph. Eberkelsey was a ferry operator from the New York side. This is where he is buried, almost opposite Carleton Island. Another picture of a bateau boat, heavily laden, and one heading downriver. So these were the main forms of transportation. Another view of Kingston, Upper Canada, from Point Henry. Quick little glimpse. Early Kingston Harbor. Let's give you a few minutes to have a peek at the different streets. Like, for instance, Store Street is now Princess Street. Quarry Street, Bagot. King Street is still the same. Front Street, now Ontario. And you can see the Scow Ferry, the Knapp Ferry, which is now the LaSalle Causeway. Let's scoot across the river, take a look at early Wolfe Island. This is where the village hasn't been established yet, Barrett Bay. And then there's a ferry wharf way down, which would become the coal wharf a few years later. But as you see, the settlements are very, very sparse just by the first families living there. Garden Island is a little place of its own on the top of the picture. Carolina Grant, whose mother-in-law was the Baroness de Longueuil, lived her husband was David Grant and Patrick Langan, who were granted Wolfe Island. Carolina Grant married Charles William Grant, who became the Baron, and she became the Baroness. Her wedding present was a chateau, a French chateau, and this was called a chateau, it was pointed out to me, but my father and people back then called it the Old Castle. No trace of it exists today, but it became the Ardath Castle through family connections. The Allens married into the Grants, and it became their summer residence as well. And sometime in the 1920s, no one ever admitted, it caught fire and burnt completely to the ground. And it's not even a stone really remains. So the significance of this is inside was a plan for a new steamboat. Up to then, travel across the river had been somewhat haphazard, but the little steamer Wolfe was put together, and Charles Grant gave the contract to Archibald Hitchcock, who married Polly Hinckley. Polly Hinckley was first married to Tom Davis, one of the early settlers on Wolfe Island. And Tom Davis, like so many Wolfe Islanders, drowned in the early spring when his sleigh broke through the ice. So we'll see a little bit of that going on a little bit later on. This was their wharf. That's the main ferry wharf, just behind the two gentlemen. But it's in front of the plan here, the ferry wharf, the Hitchcock House, the Hitchcock Ferry Hotel, the Masonic Hall. These buildings are still there to this day. The wharf isn't T-shaped anymore, like that later photograph showed. The house, the Hitchcock House, this white part of the building is torn down today, and the new owner has put a stone front to it, blending in with the three-story stone original house very, very well. This was added when the Ferry Hotel became very busy. Inside here, Polly Hitchcock was the postmistress, the Wolfe Island doctor, the village of Marysville. Polly's name was Mary Hinckley. So Mary Hinckley, Aunt Polly, she became known. The village of Marysville is named for this remarkable lady. I have no pictures of her. We've never been able to find one. It's rumored she's buried in Bath. The Ives brothers took over the ferry, and this, according to one of my research people, Walter Lewis, this is the actual ferry Hunter on her way out of towing logs from the Rideau. But he said that is the actual ferry Hunter, which was on the Wolfe Island run years ago. So the Ives brothers had a ferry schedule drawn up, 1846. There'll be a test at the end of this, so you please memorize. The Island Queen was by the Ives brothers as well, and her claim to fame was the Martello Tower, Shoal Tower out in front of City Hall. When it was under construction around their time, they built a coffer-dam, and the Island Queen's paddle wheel was hooked up to a pump, which pumped out the coffer-dam and allowed construction of the new Martello Tower. And another steam ferry, 1848, one trip, two trips, three, yeah. This Tom Davis was Aunt Polly's son, and his father, he was named for his father, and he had a propeller ferry called the Experiment, and they started the Wolfe Island Ferry Company in 1855. But the ferry itself was constantly breaking down. The pier for it was at the foot of West Street. I'm sorry, William Street. At that time, tenders were out again for the ferry, 1858. And gentlemen, the one in the middle row, the one with the white hair, tall, sitting down, and the white beard, is Coleman Hinckley Sr. And he joined up with George Matheson Kinghorn, a forwarder from Montreal. Kinghorn summoned Mr. Hinckley because Mr. Hinckley won the 1841 regatta in Kingston, one of the first regattas put together by Commodore Sandham of the Royal Navy. So for the heck of it, for want of a better word, and I won't linger, Hinckley just put his ferry in the midst of this race. And Coleman had been riding a sailboat sailing since he was old enough to walk. And when the cannon went off, when Commodore Sandham fired the cannon, the Wolfe Island Ferry, she was unnamed, entered the race and beat them hands down. Every one of the other sailors were upended, came about. I'm not going to play with sailing terms because I really don't know. But anyway, Coleman Hinckley won. So Mr. Kinghorn was interested in this Mr. Hinckley, and he recognized the need for trade to Montreal, but the trade they were looking for was from Kingston to the eastern seaboard, and by way of possibly finishing off that canal that Angus Cameron, Reeve, Wolfe Island's first Reeve, Angus Cameron, got together with a committee and they started digging a canal, cutting Wolfe Island right in half at its narrowest point. What if you and I joined forces? This is Mr. Kinghorn from Montreal, a real no-nonsense businessman. And they would together, Coleman Hinckley supplied the timber for the Pierpont 1. This was built at the Powers shipyard and had a steam engine. And Mr. Kinghorn married Richard Scoble's daughter, Elizabeth, and Mr. Scoble owned the wharf at the foot of Brock Street. Here you can see the cut of Wolfe Island. If you're familiar with Wolfe Island, I'm sure everybody listening tonight is. From the left, Barrett Bay, and from the right, Big Bay, towards where the seaway is. So this is where this canal would be cut. The canal itself is an evening's presentation. I'm not going to linger on it. Henry Gildersleeve, the father of steam navigation, was involved. He came aboard with this. John A. Mcdonald, alderman, came aboard with this. Dylan O'Kelvin of Garden Island fame. So work began. They continued where it was left off. And just as the picture shows, this is what it was: back-breaking labor, horse labor, and constant digging. There's a bird's eye view. I'm surprised they were able to get so high back in the 1840s, but I'm not going to question it. But there's there's a bird's eye. You're looking at Kingston, and I have fished along this canal as a kid. I don't think it's as open today as it is here, but the village of Marysville can be seen way off in the distance, and there's Kingston off in the distance. So they're about roughly maybe halfway into the St. Lawrence Seaway, which would be just behind this picture. Okay, back to the Scoble connection for the ferry. This is Brock Street, the pier here. And when George Kinghorn and Hinckley merged, they extended it. So there's another shot of Brock Street. They're also shipping timber from here as well. Kingston Harbor was fairly busy. There's Brock Street again. Wood, little boats everywhere, just everywhere. And here's a map view looking straight down. You can see where Scoble's Wharf is, very bottom of the picture, the different wharves. Try to picture what they are today. Most of this is filled in. You can see where the Tete du Pont Barracks, Fort Frontenac is, and the Cataraqui Bridge. Here's how the Crow sees it, same spot. Let's go down a little further. You can see where Scoble's Wharf is, way up at the top, and the Wolfe Island Ferry is about where the R is in Harbor. And that's at the foot of William Street. And that side face is still exposed today. So the ferry ran from there. That was granted for the ferry. It would later go to the Scoble Kinghorn Wharf, Crawford Wharf later. And there's how the Crow sees it again. Linger. A little bit further down the harbor, Cameron's Wharf, Marine Railway, there's where the Marine Museum is today. The United States Wharf, Ontario. You can tell by the buildings, the large apartment buildings today are named for some of these wharfs. The next vessel to come into the line on the left, this is the Brock Street dock with the Fort Battery in front of the City Hall. You'll get a better look backwards in a minute. The ferry to the left is the Pierpont because she was designed, the Watertown was designed with arches like her forerunner. So the only way we understand that's the earlier Pierpont. The Watertown was launched in 1864 and had a disastrous fire with loss of life a year later in Cape Vincent. But from this photograph, let's take a look up. There's what City Hall would have looked like in the winter, same time period. Pierpont, Coleman Hinckley master, commencing. We'll leave Kingston at 8 and trade over to the stateside, all the rest of it. We'll get into that a little bit later. Coleman Hinckley himself lived in Cape Vincent, and this is his house today. Beautiful spot. The upper bedroom windows would be where a kid would be yelling through the streets, fire, fire on the waterfront. And old man Hinckley lifts them, and it's a boat's on fire, and all bedlam broke loose in the village of Cape Vincent. You can imagine the horse and the ringing of the bells and guys hanging off the end of the wagon. The Gazelle was the other ferry. She was a lumber steamer from the Grenville area up the Ottawa River. Well, she was purchased for the Wolfe Island run by Kinghorn and Hinckley. And playing with the computer, playing with this photograph, we were able to blend it and read the name Gazelle on her bow. And that was a wow moment for me. I said, oh, my wife was able to do that. And she said, look at the name on the front. And I said, my God, you found the Gazelle. Anyway, she plays a part in a little bit later on here. There's what Marysville looked like back in the day. If you can look in closer, you can see the large finger dock of the ferry wharf. That would be the Hitchcock ferry wharf. Look towards the right and you see Dawson's Wharf. That would become the main ferry wharf a few years later. In fact, at this time, different vessels ran from each. The Dawson ferry wharf, not to be confused with Dawson Point. No. The Dawson Hotel, the General Wolfe Hotel, was linked up to it. So we'll get a look at that a little bit later. The ferry Gazelle, she would run from Kingston to Gananoque, and the Pierpont and Gazelle, they're different schedules. Boats were everywhere. Archibald McClellan was the captain at this time of the Gazelle, 1864. Well, just before Christmas in 1864, the Gazelle was stuck off Garden Island. Common, and that would be common 100 years from this date. The boat would only get so far. Well, she was stuck. So Archie McClellan climbed up into the paddle box to chip the ice out. Coleman Hinckley saw that she was too long at the island, and being both seasoned mariners, he knew she was stuck. So steam was still up on the Watertown. He brings the Watertown over and starts to circle, breaks the ice around the Gazelle. Unfortunately, it released the pressure, and McClellan, who was up in the paddle box, enclosed in a box, the wheel started to move and he was crushed instantly. Here's an early picture of the second Pierpont. That's from the Marine Museum. And there they are, the Gazelle. This is an 1872 picture according to what was labeled, and it says May, but I believe it was taken earlier. The Pierpont II, launched in 1871 by Kinghorn and Hinckley. She's on her way to Cape Vincent. The Gazelle is picking up passengers tied to the wharf for Wolfe Island. The depot at Cape Vincent was intended to be a railroad depot linking up with trade down to New York City. So the railroad did get there. The canal did not happen. The rail car ferry, the John Counter, was a financial loss, and the railroad could not get through the swamp ward in Kingston. So the whole venture went bankrupt. And that's when Kinghorn and Hinckley simply used the canal as a shortcut, beating out Overton Gildersleeve for the ferry trade to the Cape. That looks like an impressive warehouse, but it didn't quite come out that way. It was a little bit smaller, but you can see the rails, and this is the American side of the Cape. It's there to this day. The Pierpont alongside the depot at Cape Vincent, and Mary Hinckley Hamilton, a direct descendant of Coleman Hinckley, is there at the depot. But the railway is gone. The rails were to the right of this photograph, and it's now a marina. But that is still the same building, and the same building that the Watertown was alongside when they cut her loose that night, and she drifted down to Featherbed Shoal on Carlton Island. There were 4 people killed in that fire. And the Watertown burnt almost to the water line, but was towed back by the Pierpont to the waterfront in Wolfe Island, tied to the Dawson dock, and there towed to Power Shipyard and rebuilt, bigger and better than it was. This is Coleman Hinckley's son, Coleman Jr., with his wife Lizzie, and they're on the top deck of the Pierpont too. He was captain of her for many, many years. He's buried in Cataraqui here. There's the Wolfe Island Village. Looking at it quickly, the main wharf is the Dawson Wharf. The coal wharf, Wolfe Island was receiving coal, and plus it was a stopover for the canal, was on the right. And the Hitchcock Wharf can be seen off to the far left. The wharf today, the Cummins Wharf, is at the foot of Center Street. So if you can make out Center, the little square is the store, Cummins store, Fargo store today. And that's where the wharf is today. It's that little peak exactly halfway between the Hitchcock House and the Dawson dock. The Hinckley's ran a ferry. Sam Hinckley ran a horse-powered ferry to the Cape, meanwhile. Yeah. And plus they ran the mail in the wintertime. Now we've had a presentation by the Horn family, and it in itself is priceless. Bruce Horn had footage of these boats scooting across through the ice floes. The mail had to go year round. So they got it through dangerous ice, and then safe ice, and then ice that's not so safe. Captain Pike, very much a Wolfe Island name, was given a dinner on his retirement as captain of the ferry by Hiram Hitchcock, Ferry House. The Maud, one of the first vessels to run through the canal, Overton Gildersleeve owned her. The Pierpont. The Folger brothers, by now, bought out George Kinghorn. Coleman Hinckley Sr. and Jr. continued to work for the Folger brothers. Princess Louise on the ferry run once in a while. Different boats came. But look at the foot of Brock Street today. The Maud has been extended. Probably looks like by 100 feet, looks like to me. The Pierpont can be seen alongside. It's like today. Brock Street is still a popular dock with the Canadian Empress, the Island Queen, the Star, and usually somebody across the end. And the other vessel is the Charlotte, and that's Brock Street there. Okay. This is the Maud again. Her name has been changed to the America. And if you're wondering where she is, she's right along Brock Street with the big elevator to her right. That would be the scene of a tragic fire. 100 years, about 100 years later. There's the Maud, the America, with Coleman Jr. taking her through the Lachine Rapids. 1954, the Maud was called the Midland City. And here she is just before she was dismantled. That is one long life from built 1871 to 1954, but that's the same vessel. These are the Folger brothers. Henry, Benjamin, And part of my wish, I knew I'd forget the one, Howard, Benjamin, Howard, and Henry. Okay, there. Captain Coleman Hinckley's grave, Cape Vincent, with his wife Isabella, Coleman Hinckley Sr. And George Matheson Kinghorn died in Montreal. He left the forwarding business in Kingston, and he and his wife Elizabeth are buried in Montreal. Their two little children are buried, as you can see, on the left part of the stone in Kingston. They're buried in Cataraqui. Well, tenders were up for the Wolfe Island Ferry by Tom Fawcett, Reeve. And the township decided enough was enough. We'll build our own. And they named her Tom Fawcett. There she is, one of her first photographs. The Bertram Yard in Toronto built her and brought her down, and she was put into service June of 1904. But in 1905, Captain James Crawford was her first master, first captain. In 1905, Tom Fawcett wasn't Reeve anymore, so they changed her name to Wolfe Islander. So this is the Wolfe Islander 1, coming into Brock Street. A little worse for the wear. That's the same dock, folks, with a different face, different things on it. This is a few years later because you can see a car there. Okay. Steamer Wolfe Islander, Bryceland. There'll be a test on this as well, so memorize that. And you know it didn't keep a schedule because I've driven the boat 100 years later, and yeah. Okay, here's another view of the village, built up a little bit more. I've closed in. The Dawson Wharf, the ferry wharf, the two arrows to the left of the picture is where the Cummins dock, a little pier, was built, and that's the ferry dock today. But the Dawson Wharf, the main one, but the middle of the picture beneath the A in St. Lawrence was the ferry dock by this time. And there's the new Wolfe Islander at the Dawson Wharf, the big ferry shed with wood, freight, everything else to be loaded aboard, and cars and vehicles being pulled off. And you know, not a lot's changed since that picture was taken, really. I've pulled many a car off by hand too, and so has every fellow crew member. And this again is at the Dawson Wharf. And some more freight to go on, different picture, maybe a couple of years later. And there she is, steaming out, heading to Kingston from the Dawson Wharf. A few cars and horses left. Shed there. And she was on charter now and then, advertised, because the ferry went downriver to, called it Brophy's Point, the Holiday Dock, Walker's Dock on Howe Island, and Breakey's Bay, and then would turn around and come back, picking up milk, cheese, whatever else it could. Here's where the ferry dock would become. You can see by the Woodman house, that's the original ferry wharf, but the dock now has been moved to the bottom of Center Street. And this is the Cummins Wharf with the ferry house on it. That's the same dock the Wolfe Islander has landed for 100 years later. That's the same wharf with the ferry house on it. Busy spot, typical Sunday afternoon, getting off the steamer. There's a big occasion here. I think a politician, Hepburn, was supposed to show up, didn't. All right. Same landmarks, many of you will recognize if you're familiar with Wolfe Island. The Bryceland House off to the left, Buck Mullins just behind the ferry house. Sometimes a mishap happened. Touch wood, it hasn't happened to me. But I guess I don't know the occasion or what happened, but obviously a car or carriage has slipped off. The mooring lines have slipped, and the whole town has turned out. Okay. And she'd landed Garden Island. Here's a mom and her little girl waiting for the boat coming in to pick them up, heading to Kingston. There's the ferry wharf at Brock Street. The Richardson Wharf would catch fire in 1943, Christmas Eve, and burn to the ground. One of spectacular fire of unbelievable magnitude. Here's another view, same spot. There's the Martello Tower that the Island Queen helped pump out. There's automobiles coming aboard now with horses. How many cars could she carry? I really don't know, 4, 5. They eventually were able to put one in those doors. You see the 2 doors, which were passageways, I'm told, to go to the upper deck. Well, they cleared those doors wider and you could put a car down each one because traffic was starting to build up a little bit. And she wasn't too bad for an old girl. I don't mean Alma Cosgrove. This is the top deck of the Wolfe Islander. And Alma's uncle, Richard Spoor, was purser for more than 20 years on the boat. And many older Wolfe Islanders will certainly remember Dickie Spoor. Unbelievable hockey and baseball player. Could have turned pro, but he was very content with his ferry job, and he was a fine gentleman. I remember him quite well. Here's the Wolfe Islander, model made by Eugene Tarrant. See the paddle wheels, the deck. Got a little view of her. This is part of the Marine Museum today. And I have studied this intently. I don't remember Wolfe Islander 1. No, she was gone before my time. But I couldn't believe it when Captain Buck Mullen told me the previous boat was a side wheeler. And I said, now I'm trying to get the arithmetic in my head. 1946, World War II, destroyers, fast moving ships, and Wolfe Island still had a paddle wheel boat like Mississippi? Buck says, yeah, she sure did. I think somebody's pulling my leg. No, they weren't. This is the ferry landing out by Garden Island, because that's as far as she'd get, like her predecessor, the Gazelle, the Watertown, the Pierpont 1. And this was a village gathering. Horse and sleighs would go out here, meeting the boat. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Freight would come out from these long, big, awkward boats. And at this time of the year, either it's early or late spring. So you can't bring the horses out. You're using a ice punt and a lot of backbreaking work. The crew think it's hard today. I remember the crew loading these on the Wolfe Islander 2. I certainly don't remember this. Captain George Bates is a mate here, and Captain Mcdonald is seen behind the gentleman. His name Besaw there, and Cricket Hawkins handing one of the cans over. There's an actual ice boat with the poles going across, called a thwartships. And if you broke through the ice, you're pushing this boat. Everybody aboard pushed the boat through the ice. And if you fell through, you just hopped aboard. Easy as pie. Well, till something goes wrong. Captain Alan McDonald with his daughter. Alan McDonald was captain of the Wolfe Islander 1 for 22 years. And I have a favorite tale. From the left is Jack Gray, the engineer, Captain McDonald. George Rattray was the purser beside him. James Russell was the oiler beside him. And the other 2 crew members I can't identify. So the Islander got lost in a snowstorm. This is the heading in 1916. She was guided to dock by bonfire and church bells. Great anxiety on the island. There was no panic. Well, how I pictured it was, let's see the boat coming into the village. Some of our listeners tonight, probably you've all come in on the boat. I've come in a snowstorm where you can't see. I have radar, electronic charts, all the above. I do remember when the captains literally looked out the window. Well, picture it with a side wheeler with nothing else, bawling cows at the front, and then suddenly church bells start going off. Then another one starts going off. So I don't know if this really happened, but Captain Alan Mcdonald was Catholic. Okay. And the mate, Bill Armstrong, was Methodist. So which one is it? Cap, I'm not sure. Come on, Armstrong, aren't you? You're a good Methodist. Don't you know the sound of your own bell? It's critical. Beg pardon, Captain, you're Catholic, don't you? So around they go again. Somebody lit a fire at the end of the Dawson dock, and they knew where they were. And the meantime, Father Fleming started ringing the big bell. There was a new cathedral being built on the island in 1916. And while I can ring the little tin bell in here, what if I pull on this? To this day, nobody knows. Did he actually? Because the bell would have been installed in the brand new Sacred Heart Church. Okay, this is the freight. Please take a moment to read this because that's on a test. Let's see, paint and boxes. Well, 15 cents. Well, how else is paint in cans? Ale, soda, what made it to the cross? Eggs in crates or boxes, bread, all of it. Here you are. And there's your schedule. 1938, steamer Wolfe Islander. John O'Shea Sr. is the manager. He's the reeve. There she is pulling out of Kingston, going right through the marina today. Cow up front. And then she went ashore at Howe Island at Walker's Dock. Punctured her side, but she'll be easily repaired. I have a favorite story of this, and it's something out of Andia Mayberry ringing the bell, ringing the doctor's office, because the reeve at the time was Dr. William Spanky, and people are all in his waiting room waiting for the doctor, and the phone's ringing, and well, you can only imagine. I could spend 10 minutes. We won't. William Horn, the other side, the linkage to the Horn family were Samuel Hinckley started the ferry from his dwelling over to Gravelly Point, which is now Cape Vincent. Sam Hinckley's daughter, Olivia, married Demetrius Spinning. They took it over. And they had a daughter, Angeline, who married Tom Horn. Tom Horn and his son, Bill, old Bill seen here, and not to be mixed up with Bill, his son, who would be running the ferry later. But Tom Horn, when Grover Cleveland was elected president, there was much merrymaking in the Cape. And Tom and his son, Bill, pictured here, ran two sailing barges, and somebody left their jacket in the hotel. Young Bill took off with his passengers. His dad, Tom, would follow. Well, Dad never made it. And the next day, Angeline sent young Bill down. He said, I've seen your father come across in worse weather than that. Ran across to the Cape where his uncle, Coleman Hinckley, had the Pierpont. And together, the two of them went down towards Carlton Island, where they found the overturned boat and one passenger. Tom Horn, Bill's father, was never found. So this is what the Horn ferry was. That's how the Horns came into running the boat. They pulled a big barge. Different ferries also were landing at the Cape. The Wabick out of Rockport, Carnegie family, Kingston to Cape Vincent. Other ship, the Hebrew, Kingston to Cape Vincent again. Meantime, the old Pierpont was laid up. Her days were numbered and over. The Horn family purchased the steel ferry from Lachine called the Jock Cartier. Now, this is where it got interesting for me because, and the Jock Cartier did run a couple of trips from Kingston to Wolfe Island, but the Wolfe Islander is still a steam ferry carrying what, 6 cars? And why didn't it? Because Horn soon found out that Bill Jr. and his brother Daryl purchased this boat, and they realized it's too big for their needs. So would the township be interested in buying it? And this is where I got scratching my head. They had a boat as far back as that. Why? How come they never purchased it? And Captain Fawcett said, well, John O'Shea Sr. and Duff Cosgrove could tell you what happened 50 years ago. They couldn't look 2 minutes ahead. And I've kept that to this day. So the Jacques Cartier was sold, and back downriver she went towards Montreal. That's the Jacques Cartier today. Same boat. And this is in Trois-Rivières. And she's doing tours. She's been renovated further. I haven't seen today. I mean, this is 2008 when I personally took this picture in Trois-Rivières. And Wolfe Island on the north end plugged along with whatever they had. This is a Carmel Cosgrove original picture. The gentleman to the right is ice expert Orville Tricky McDermott. He and his father Paddy could literally almost walk in water. Now, there's only been one other gentleman that's ever done that, but these two came close. And they were the ice expert. This is Orville a few years later. That's Minnie the Mare. And so they took you across when the ice was dangerous. Later on, islanders went themselves. Almost every Wolfe Islander knew ice, but Tricky and Minnie just had that special quality. There's was in the Whig Standard, I think, in 1940 something with Philip Ryan and Fred Whitmarsh. Tricky McDermott in the middle. They broke through 3 times, but they're all right. Yeah, there they go, scooting across. Now, I wouldn't get in that thing to go across from one dock, from one part of the bay to the other. Look at the weight, and look at the horse. Look at Minnie looking back, and we're going where? All the way to Kingston. You see that when it wets up, and if any of the if Kenny White is listening tonight, I had to ask the ice experts today, Kay Fawcett and Kenny White, how did you read this? And they said you just had to be there every day during this dangerous time. Well, Orville McDermott certainly knew, and the people trusted him. And those milk cans, by the way, are full. So here you go, head to Kingston. Don't get your feet wet. Old Wolfe Islanders getting tired. She's tied up at Swift's Wharf. Here, that's about where the Ramada Inn is today. Swifts would be used to tie the ferries up now and again. And the Islanders are frowning, you know, this ancient old steamer. Here's one of her last timetables. Again, you know the drill. And then a boiler accident, killing both Edward Reed and Joe Morrison. They were both scalded to death on the dock. A boiler line let go, and superheated water. You just don't let your mind go there. But they both mercifully died. So the island would continue going across early in the spring, and this was around 1946, St. Patrick's Day. And I couldn't believe it, but this was the same boat. And this was what begins the story of the St. Patrick's Day tragedy, when 4 islanders are drowned. And it was simply almost right where this picture is taken. They were simply only 200 feet offshore when the accident happened. March 19, 1946. George and Gerald Allery, Clarence Adair, Howard Cummins drowned. There were 8 of them in the boat. The survivors were Leon McDermott, Bobby White, Keith McCready, and John Lacey. The heroes who saved the men who survived were Cletus Guernsey and Wilf Hogan, each holding a piece of plank from an old overturned boat that they managed to get in, and freezing their hands, paddled out as hard as they could, saving those that survived. And they tell me it was one big funeral. And Wolfe Islanders' days were numbered. On Dominion Day, 1946, the Department of Transport, accidents, she's leaking, she's unsafe. What do we do? That's your problem. So Dominion Day, this was headlines, well, not headlines on page 13, but it was a bigger opening than the Whig Standard had. In the foreground is the motorboat Rabola, owned by Rowley and Buck Mullen. Here's 3 guys out of work. Oliver Davis, Captain Oliver Davis, Sylvester Murray, and Purser Richard Spoor. Lyle Dugan, who everyone will remember in Kingston, was the pilot boat operator just by the Marine Museum. There's his boat loading up freight because the Islanders in 1946 had nothing. Captain Buck Mullen had a motorboat and taxi service. With his one boat, he and his father had Old Sadie. My dad bought Old Sadie years later, and I remember the boat. Mr. Mullen can be seen at the far left, Winfield Woodman, his brother Bruce. I don't know the lady in the middle, and Buck Mullen himself to the right. Well, then they built a boat by Gordon Roney just outside the village to the west. Named her for Buck's sister Reba and his mother Ola Hinckley. There she is. And she was put into service. There's Gordon Roney, who built the boats, built several in the village of Wolfe Island. Captain Fawcett told me one night we had, I think, almost 100 coming home before Christmas. Now, take a look at the picture. I said, where did you put them? On the roof? He said, anywhere anybody could go. That was the only boat. And Captain Mullen told me she burnt her engine out the first year. Landing barges were acquired from the war surplus from Toronto. This is landing at Swift's Wharf in Kingston and landing on the island by the side of the Cummins Wharf. Wolfe Islander 1 was done. Oscar McCready bought her, and she was towed around where she was tied up. The Wolfe Islander 1 and the new boat would never meet. She was tied up there and eventually caught fire and burnt right where she is here on the South Shore. And a fire also happened in the village, 46. That's when they needed a fire engine of their own. And with all the wooden houses, thank God there was just a minimal damage. So a boat was found in Collingwood, the Ottawa class, and here's the Ottawa Maytor. Well, with a bit of work and renovation, plans were set up, and the Wolfe Islander 2 was built, or the MS Wolfe Islander, I call her, motor ship. That very life ring you see, one of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, which one is hanging up right over here? I won't turn the computer. That was a gift to me this past summer, an original life ring from 1946. But there she is, ready for her trip down in November 7th, 1946. Captain Jimmy Haylock brought her down, and George Bates would act as mate. And young deckhand Richard Fawcett was aboard for the trip. There she is, ready to go. Same place. And they moved the ferry house by horsepower. Took a couple of horses to pull her up, a couple of guys moving the trees. That's Fargo store today. There's the ferry dock, minus the house. She was all built and rebuilt for 47 for the new boat. Grant Mcdonald did a painting of the new boat, and this huge painting hung in the Whig Standard office for years, and today is now part of the Marine Museum, where it proudly hangs up, I think, someplace, I hope. When we had the Ferry's 60th anniversary, Marie Smith said, anything you want, you can borrow. And I said, what about, he said, oh, Brian, if anything's going to fall, that's the one that's going to fall. So it never left the museum. And this is my copy of that iconic picture. And it hangs in my front hall. This is Reeve Craig Russell, opening ceremony November 18th, 1946, with the island at the foot of Clarence Street, welcoming their new boat. There's the band getting ready to play at the other end, right by the Swift's Wharf. First load, flags all flying, And here she comes into Wolfe Island, November 20th, 1946. She got christened a second time, following day. It took Sadie Russell 5 swings to break the bottle. Kept bouncing back. The photographer, I don't know how many pictures he took, but this is the one I had. There's young Wally Niles hanging over the side. He was everywhere in those early Village pictures at that time. And there she heads back to Kingston. Service was free for the next 4 days. She's too big. We'll never fill her. What do we need something so big for? She did excursions. Here she is in Gananoque the same year, Captain Carnegie by then. All the flags flying. Beautiful picture of the top deck. I get a kick out of this one. This is the main salon and they're dancing in here. I've been in here many, many times, as many Wolfe Islanders watching tonight probably have. These, I just saw these, came upon these pictures this year. Just beautiful. And the band also played down in the car deck. And then winter set in. I think I see a lead over there. Captain Joe Sebastian Sisti was skipper now. Gary the Rush pointing the way. She's too big. What do we need something so big for? Once in a while, she picked up the odd airplane. I did too, but we didn't bring the airplane with us. Doing what she did best, carrying hay and supplies just before freeze up. Everybody was heading to town this day. And then spring would come. This was in the Whig Standard. There she is. I did a ferry talk at the Ramada Inn. And I said, anybody in the room, do you know where this is? Oh, Brock Street. No, it was here, it was there. I said, no, it's outside the window, right here. Just outside the window. The Wolfe Islanders right there. And she caught fire. Just an oil fire. Looks worse than it was. And then she blew away. 1950. January 14th. Now, this is a picture of her in a storm years later, because you can tell by the Canadian flag, and I can tell by several things. This is a good picture of her in heavy weather, but it gives you an idea of what happened. It blew the ferry away, and everybody thought she went down. This is 1950, not 1850. That's what I couldn't get over. The news had the boat lost, but it was one heck of a wind. Blew the end off. McAdoo's barn, George Pike's barn, I'm sorry. Mr. and Mrs. Abbott were happy to be home. They were aboard for the wild ride. I knew both of them. Mrs. Marlowe, Louis Kane, he had bread in the truck, so the crew were all able to eat. The boat ended up down at the foot of Wolfe Island, dropping both anchors, where she would end up again in 1965 in another wind. This is the crew. I think I have that life ring. I do believe that's the one. Let's see, there's 8 of them. What are the odds? Captain Joe Sisti and crew. This was a Whig Standard picture. That winter, a few years later, DJ Greenwood, that's my uncle, and William Geronimus. First one's across. The ice, I think, is 4 inches thick. Buck Mullen was running the Saucy Sally, according to the paper here, Reeve Keys. That's a picture of her. He'd take people across when the ice was dangerous. He lowered the engine. That's a George Lilly picture, I believe, in Kingston. And people still continued to cross the ice. The caption here in the Whig Standard, somebody ought to fill the potholes in the road. Town Hall holding its head. And accidents did happen. This is where they assumed Clarence Ogle went through the ice. Everybody labeled here. I'll give this a couple of, just maybe a few seconds longer. Doyle, Francis Lawler, Dick Feeney, Donnie Greenwood, Paul LaRush. I think that's Joe Hogan and Buck Mullen. Well, Mr. Ogle did go down with the car. And this is a later picture of the ice road from the foot of West Street. Head out, jump the bump, and put her to the boards and straight on till morning. I remember it well as a kid. I remember doing it myself, just for the heck of it. My grandmother warning me, if the ferry's running, that ice has a place to go. And I remember saying, Nana, I know the ice. I didn't know Sikkim from Fetcham, okay? Because I would break the ice years later. And all it took was a simple little breeze to come up, wet up the ice, and then it would move and cover the ferry track. And the ferry would find that lead and follow it until the wind changed. Where would it open? Only God knew. And then the water came up in the early 50s, late 47, and again in the 50s. This is at the Cummins dock. And that's Captain Joe Sisti with Tyner LaRush rolling them out to work. And Horns have got a new boat. May 25th, 1952, built by Harry Gamble at Gamble Shipyard in Port Dover. Another picture of her a year later. Yeah, she's a year older than me. Okay. Bill Horn Jr. at the wheel of the new boat. And Daryl Horn down on the deck. This is at Cape Vincent. That's a picture of them coming in the late 50s. Same dock. Make a hard to port. That's the pilot boat tied up there. By this time, the pilots were coming from Kingston, and then they'd jump on here until it moved to the stateside. Two very good friends, teachers and mentors, Captain Richard Fawcett, R.F. Fawcett, and Captain Elwood Buckmullen, both running captains now in 1958. And with Buckmullen was mate Elwood Woodman in the wheelhouse of the Wolfe Islander. Schedule. A few years later, Buckmullen in the same wheelhouse. The brass just shone, polished, and who was telling me not long ago, I think it was Daryl Mullen, saying, I can still smell the varnish and the cigar smoke. I said, funny that, I can smell that too. What little time we were there. But I sat in the corner, opposite corner, and I listened to the most fascinating stories I would ever hear. I said, you've got to be kidding me that the ice crusher went across. That's a big load for the Wolfe Islander 3. How that carried, the Wolfe Islander carried the crusher. He says, well, RF said we had water coming through the scuppers by the time we cleared Garden Island. When they were repairing the dock in the village, the Wolfe Islander would use the Spurs dock, or the Flynn dock way up the head. And that's not much more than you see here. And the boat's tied up to a tree and a bollard here or there. And she'd run over here and then run and pick up things from Simcoe Island. That's a picture I treasure. It's Captain Buck Mullen, Audrey Mullen, and precious there is Captain Daryl Mullen, who would join the ferry years later. You'll see, I think, Daryl in another picture coming up. That's off Garden Island. Again, that's as far as the boat got before she tie up for the year. And this is loading from Garden Island, or out in the ice. Give it to her. I don't remember it. And I think Captain Woodman told me, you didn't come across when this was going on. Your uncle and your father wouldn't bring you and your brother across during this time. And a lot of freight, because this is the boat's going to be tying up in a couple of weeks. The Salvage Prince would help from Pike Salvage. This is bringing supplies across out in the bay. The ice road, Noble Staley, Kingston in the background. This is around the time, about Christmas 1955, when an accident happened off Garden Island again. And almost 100 years after Captain McClellan, about the same spot. A horse and sleigh coming out to the boat came up to the tug. The Wolfe Islander had broke her rudder and was tied up for the season. So the salvage Prince continued to run service. And as she came alongside the ice, the horse and sleigh came out, and the Captain Bates noticed that the runner started breaking through, and then he saw the lead. And he opened the door and said, "Don't anyone panic," as the horse and sleigh went through the ice. It was through the heroic efforts of George Bates and his son, Eddie, who was only 14, crawled out onto the ice. People were floating, and the temperature, I think they tell me, was minus 25, including a 4-month-old baby. Pictured here are years later, 50 years later, I did the story, Open Sleigh, Thin Ice. Daryl and Fern Small are in the picture, and Holly was the 4-month-old baby. All three of them were in the water, and all three of them were rescued.
Okay.
And the ice road continued. Several vehicles and machines were used. This weapon would scoot across over to the Cape now and again with Al McAdoo, and who's seen pictured here. And that's Audrey Mullen's father, Mr. Suds. I can't grab his first name right off the bat. That machine is still out on the south side of the island at McCrady's farm. We'd love it for the Marine Museum or for the Wolfe Island Museum, but it's a classic. And I told you I'd show you Daryl Mullen again. And Captain Daryl said to me, "Can you imagine if the police caught Dad taking my picture? And this is well out into the harbor. Get up on there." Did they get the car out? I don't know, Daryl said. I didn't care. And then I just crawled off. But that was our magazine cover for Windward a couple of years ago. And the ice road is starting to get a little sloshy. Yeah, a lot sloshy. Just behind the men running out is our old house museum today. That's the Tyner the Rush House. Yeah, they got the tractor out. And the ice was thick in some places, Carl Greenwood showing you here. Time to break the boat out from Kingston, and that's a long way to Wolfe Island by chainsaw. (1963) was a tough year for the boat and the tug. That was the year my grandfather died, and it was one heck of a winter. Gene Mannion run the Wolfe Island Airline, flew people across if they needed to. The ice took out Horn's dock that year. What could we do? All we could do was watch out the window. Horn's Ferry, she winter usually in the village in Marysville, and then help break out the Wolfe Islander in the spring. That's the William Darrell today, a couple of years ago. She had a summer off or two the past 2 years. For the first time in history, there was no ferry to the States. Kingston Harbor, a locomotive plant. The Marine Museum is just behind the shipyard. Water was low in 1964, so they had to use a bulldozer to pull the boat in. You can see how low it is, Cummins Dock. 2 ferries were scheduled to replace Wolfe Islander, and the service would be free. And these ferries, the John McPhail and the James Curran, would run from Brophy's Point to Rogers Side Road. They were pulled down by the tug G.W. Rogers, and they didn't make it. They sank in Lake Huron off Saginaw Bay, and Becky Schott is the diver who took these pictures of them and what used with permission. So the Wolfe Islander was out. Miss Kingston even shared their run, but she was just not big enough and they needed freight. So Horns came around, William Darrell, and assisted. Here's a typical load back in the day. Tallest building is St. Mary's Cathedral, off in the distance. Tickets. Richard Spoor is still the purser, 1964. but not for long. On October 9, 1964, service became free, like promised, but only with one boat. Now, due to the low water, a barge was taken out to an unknown spot, unknown, not known to a lot of people, out at Dawson Point. Ferguson Point was the original plan, but Dawson Point, they took the barge out, sank it, and it became a makeshift dock for when the water got too low, but it was only to be temporary. Here she's making one of her first runs in at Whitmarsh's farm. Meantime, another ferry built in 1949, the Romeo and Annette, became available and was purchased and made it to Kingston on October 9, 1964. Captain Fawcett, Captain Noel Hogan, and Captain Louis Keel. Romeo and Annette tied up for the dock that winter, and then she was on the run. And a lot of islanders will remember her. Good painting of her. Wolfe Islander had the first major refit she ever had since she was built. And she's really spiffied up. She was off for several months. Even in the wintertime, she didn't get work done like this. Much needed work was done to the old girl. Captain Noel Hogan, Wayne Eves. It's the inside of the Upper Canada. I don't remember the direct controls off to the left here. These were added later, but the telegraph, the Chadburn off to the right, I remember it well. And Jackie Bryceland, and who is the other gentleman? Come to me in a second here. Alec Glenn. Another picture of the Upper Canada at Crawford, or the Cummins Dock. The two of them would meet on two whistles, which is highly irregular, but that's how they did it. And if any of you are mariners, normally a ship meets on one whistle, port to port, turning the wheel to starboard. Well, it was opposite here. And one night, mate Dick Kingsley said in the fog, you couldn't put a piece of paper between us when we met. New schedule for the boats, and this was upgraded later on. Again, memorize this. And Wolfe Islander coming in at the Kinghorn dock, which is now called the Crawford Wharf, and the Upper Canada coming alongside at the end. I worked on the Muskogong at the time. That's the tour boat right there at the corner, 1973. The Upper Canada at the end, the dock, she was a beautiful boat and handled really, really unbelievable. And winter come in, tug helping the Wolfe Islander. Snake Island off in the distance, don't look for it today. All it is just a break, just breaking water. And people still continue to cross the ice. Noble Staley. And there's the ice track pulled by the tug Vanguard here. Upper Canada tied up. Here's what the inside of the wheelhouse looks like when she was under tow by the Vanguard here, Captain Harold Hogan. And there's what she looks like in color. This time it's from the tug Salvage Monarch. Captain George Bates, same skipper who brought her down so many years ago. Radar was added, Lauren Mcdonald and Frank Mason, the wheelhouse. Crew of the Wolfe Islander. I'm not going to try to name everybody from right, and Louis Keel, Elwood Woodman, Sherman Niles, Jackie Bryceland, John Michaels, Harvey Eves. I can't grab the engineer's name on the end. That's on the main car deck. And then she got stuck out in 1972 out in the ice. Tug lost its rudder. But with makeshift repairs, she only spent the night out there. People just simply got off and walked home. And then took a makeshift jury rudder to get the tug back to the dock. There's the Salvage Monarch breaking ice in the spring around her. And then the Wolfe Islander developed a hole in the side of her hull, so she had to be welded up there at the dock. The Pierre de Sorel from Sorel, Quebec, was to be the Wolfe Islander 3. There she is tied up at Barrack Street. And that's her in her run. Didn't happen. Engine room. She was too unruly, Harold said. So here she is tied up in Hamilton. But under its own power, she ended up down in Montreal 2 years ago. And there she is tied up, future unknown. A hovercraft was proposed. The right hands, can you imagine that thing flying across? Then they put a pipe, a bubble system, all the way across. And this was talked about as long ago as 1962, which was news to me. I did not know that. You can see the horses. They would weld it together and then cut and then lower it through the ice. The tug and Wolfe Islander can be seen off to the right. Here's a quick map of it from Dawson Point at the bottom, all the way to Kingston at the very top left. Series of pipes pumping warm air, 5 big compressors at Barrack Street would pump this air. And my job as a shore person some days was to make sure the pressure was up on these ungodly engines. And my God, you've never heard noise like that. Oh. Cummins Dock has been renovated for the new boat. The other dock in Kingston was the former CSL dock, Barrack Street. Warehouse is still here. That's the ferry dock in Kingston today. Put it together, the new ferry started. She gets her new name. They were going to call her the Wolfe Islander 2. And then somebody said, wait a minute. You are invited. August 15th, she hit the water. Mrs. Molly Apps broke the bottle. And they completed, put her head on, fixed her all up. Senior engineer Winfield Woodman going through a nightmare of diagrams. She was unlike anything they had ever seen. Putting together the Starship Enterprise, I think, would have been less complicated. There she is getting ready to leave. We accept you by Mr. Snell, Wolfe Islander 3. And she departed on December 9, 1975, just about 4 weeks after the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. The Wolfe Islander would go right over top, and everybody's shaking their head at the shipyard. Aren't you a wee bit nervous? Like a 10-year-old great biggest freighter on the lakes just disappeared just a few weeks ago, guys. Oh, well, they know what they're doing. Yeah, well, the engineers down below, Winfield Woodman, Eldon McCready, Jim Berry. Captain Louis Keel and the wheelhouse. And passing Detroit. Incidentally, that's her christening flag right there. And that's in my closet right now, both of them. They come out on special occasions. The gentleman was told to hang on to them. Let's get these out. Oh, when the boat's 25 years old, let's put them up on special occasion. Well, that happened and nothing happened. So when the man retired, he said, I'm going to turn these over, and then I get a knock on my front door. I know who will know what to do with them. And they fly every year. She arrived in Kingston December 16th, flying those flags, 1975. Much fanfare. Elaine and Jim Berry. Many of these records and pictures are from the lady in the picture here, Mrs. Elaine Berry, and her husband, the late Jim Berry, one of the engineers. And Jim Berry, Doug Thompson, and Eldon McCready. Look at the ice coating on the boat. And she was accepted into service February 5, 76, and had to go out of service because the units started popping out of the dimpled position. So the Wolfe Islander 2 went back into service for the next 2 days. But she continued on. Upper Canada was shown her walking papers, and here she is heading past Detroit, heading up to Christian Island. We can make her go sideways. A picture of the early wheelhouse, Louis Keel. Harold Hogan going through the drill with crew, the new boat. And then she got stuck in the ice. Not a whole lot has changed since Coleman Hinckley's time. Tug John D was there to assist, picking up cars where needed. And then she needed repair, the end of Brock Street. Just changing a propeller. And the Islanders still, they used the John D for a ferry. This is 1978, folks. So the boat heading to her Port Weller dry dock, Captain Hogan. And there she is at Port Weller. Wolfe Islander 2 participated in the 1976 Sailing Olympics. They put a second deck on her from the forepeak to the second deck, Captain Hogan. But the writing's on the wall. She was relief boat for quite a while. So the museum bought her, the Daniel McAllister towing her over. And she found her new home in the Marine Museum. Or did it? No, she got the boot. They had a better offer with the Alexander Henry. So a little bit later, September 21, 1985, she's taken off Dawson Point. The immaculate Rabola tied up to the Daniel McAllister here. Everybody's being interviewed. Captain Buck Mullen. There's the three of them, Rabola, Daniel, and the Wolfe Islander. A good couple of notes here. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I had my date right. September 21, 1985. Everybody clear out. Buck Mullen climbing over to the Daniel. He's leaving the boat for the last time. Can imagine the emotion there. And then she started down at 11:47 a.m. And then she was gone. Daniel McAllister today is in the Lachine Canal in the harbor of Montreal as a museum ship. Upper Canada didn't fare so well. She's sitting in a mud bank in Leamington, Ohio, alone and abandoned. And she was you remember those pictures that I put purposely in here. She was a beautiful boat. Well, the ferries Charlevoix and Saguenay came to relieve. Wolfe Islander gone, and the Saguenay was sold. The Charlevoix became the Frontenac II. And then somebody threatened us with tolls. And oh yes, they're coming. Oh yes. Well, they didn't. There's the Frontenac II and the Wolfe Islander. Crew picture, the 25th anniversary. I'm not going to name everybody, but 8 crew members are no longer with us. And in this life, in this picture, you can spot yours truly. I'm the guy in the middle. Okay, go look. We're not going to linger. Captain Buck Mullen, one of my truly one of my heroes, passed away in '96, and he's buried out on at the by Horns Point. Captain R.F. Fawcett, who I also thought the world of. I just adored this man. And he's in the Anglican cemetery in the village. Both gentlemen taught me pretty much everything I know. And April, my daughter, got a little message slipped on her school desk. Well, whatever became of that kid? Well, he got a little older, and one day they even put the run on him. After so many years, 2015, I said goodbye, but not for long. I was on the next week as a relief. So, sorry for the fanfare. How many Austin Minis can the Wolfe Islander hold? Well, one day we found out. I think 78. And then she got a little older. Here's a birthday. Balloons and flags and whistles and bells. Take a look at the dock in the village, the same Cummins dock. You're not going to see that anymore. Remember Dawson Point? That's it today. And a few little bumpy rides from Dawson Point. Cars get a free car wash. Take a look at Barrack Street. You're not going to see that anymore. That's going to soon disappear. Boat coming in. This is how you see it. This is how we see it. Joe Goodrow lining her up. And he's looking at one thing only in this picture. No, she doesn't automatically come in. No. You are very much handling it. Sometimes the weather gets bumpy. Sometimes it really gets bumpy. Sometimes you can't see in a snowstorm. Dawson Point. And we swear to God, it snows in July. That's the coldest spot on Earth. Then she went for a facelift. And she was gone that whole summer. But the panoramic wheelhouse, yours truly in the middle there. Coming back, 2015, all flags flying, including her original christening flags. I made sure they were aboard, and that's one of them back there. There's coming in, and beautiful shot of the ice. First star on the left, straight on till morning. There's talk of a new boat. Really? Well, the Amherst Islander was launched November 14th, 2019, Galati, Romania. Damon Shipyard. Wolfe Islander was simply floated. Wolfe Islander 4, September 11, 2020. What's the significance of that date? That's the date I started on the Wolfe Islander, September 11, 1981. Wow. Coincidence? I don't think so. They float, and then they were floated all the way across the Atlantic, and yours truly plodded them all the way across till they got to Quebec. Then they were floated. Here's a picture of the Wolfe Islander 4 tied up at Trois-Rivières. She is just beautiful. And Wolfe Islander and William Darrell, Horns Ferry beat. Geez, you were a lot bigger than they told me. And she does a slight pirouette, am I pronouncing that right? Kingston Harbor on October 9, 2021. This is Barrack Street, as we predict it'll be, I don't know, 2024, 23, 24. Hold it, that's the Village, idiot. I'm sorry, that's the Cummins dock. That's the same dock. I knew I'd mess up. It's late. You say, yeah, oh, that's Barrack Street. Oh God, who took this picture? Yes, they let me aboard. This is over in Picton with the boss. I'm the guy in the yellow. Look at that salon. That's as beautiful, and believe me, she's every bit as beautiful as any cruise ship. Oh, quick view of the engine room, and that's standing midships. It's that far the other way. And they sit quietly, waiting for spring. I want to thank my assistant, who this presentation wouldn't happen without my main person and mate, Shauna Kingston. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, very much.
Thank you very much, Brian. That was a wonderful.
I hope I didn't go too far. I was going as fast as I could. And I hear
that's all right. There's so much, there's a lot of information to share there.
Yeah.
And I'm actually very grateful that you shared. I'm trying to minimize this. You shared the photos of the horse ferry, because a number of years ago, a few years ago, before starting at the museum, I was doing some research for a local company looking at historical photos, and stumbled upon this photo in the archives at Queens of this boat with horses on it, depicting this horse ferry. And Doug at the museum here wouldn't believe me. I'm like, no, absolutely, there was a horse ferry. They were up on these like treadmills, and that's how they powered the boat to get across. And so you'll have to share that with me, because I can't seem to find the one that I had stumbled on as proof of what I've been talking about all this time. But no, that was absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
Well,
I've had a couple questions that have come in over the course, so I'm going to pull up here. But if anyone is listening, that if you want to send your questions in, you're more than welcome to do so over the YouTube chat. You're also welcome to send them by email to marnus@marmuseum.ca. I'll put that email address in the YouTube chat again. Okay, 1 second. I just flipping through screens here. There we go. So scroll up here. I'll get the question that came in. So there was a question about where did it go? The worst weather you ever had to go through in your time as captain.
That'd be 2 times. One night I had to shut the Frontenac down because the ramp at Dawson Point was working too much. And we were down to 4 knots wide out. And that was both engines running. Wolfe Islander, that would be out on the lake coming back from Hamilton. She was rolling, there was 15 feet high waves. I've experienced that twice. But one time I was pinned to the dock at Dawson Point with moving ice, and we could not get away. We could not. And I remember Captain Fawcett telling me that just be careful, that ice gets moving, you know. And I thought, we've got the horsepower, RF. And then when she was repowered, I didn't give it a second thought. But one day it happened. And so we simply turned the units. Instead of trying to get away, we simply turned them like we normally have them, everything full out, and boil the water around us. And I thought to myself, if that outer dolphin, it's on steel, 4 steel supports, when that falls over, I have to beeline it and stay out of the bay because there's no water off to the left, and we have to get to deep water. But it never happened, and eventually she started to wiggle, and we got ourselves away. But that was about the worst I've seen.
All right. So, what are your thoughts about the new electric Wolfe Islander?
I'm telling you.
You didn't mention that. I don't think you did mention that it was going to be an electric ferry. But
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm
what,
sorry.
you glossed over? I think you glossed over that point. But what are your thoughts?
I think they're fantastic. Big is not the word. I've like a little bigger than the Wolfe Islander 3, much bigger than the Wolfe Islander 3. 6 crew members. 6 times 6, you know, like 6 more maybe, because everything about her is huge. The down below, the cabin space, everything is spotless, immaculate. The most up-to-date equipment on the bridge. The wheelhouse is about the same size as the 3. The same equipment, same principle, but a couple of different handles. And mechanically wise, I'm not qualified and I won't touch it. But she's supposed to get energized at each dock every time she lands. There's batteries there that, again, I'd need notes, and I still don't know what I'm talking about. But, and she has the conventional engines if needed, you know, which is an important backup. Will I get to drive it? I don't know. Maybe they'll let me up.
For the maiden voyage to Wolfe Island. And I just had me thinking that I guess it may very well be the first new Wolfe Islander, because the first one was actually previously named, I can't remember the name of the vessel now, but all the other ones were repurposed for former vessels.
No, the Wolfe Islander 1 was the Tom Fawcett, but
right.
Brand new and just renamed. The Wolfe Islander 2 was the Ottawa Maybrook, but renamed, never used, and never floated until she was a ferry. So she was partly finished, and so they finished her on the dock. So no, she was brand new. Now, the Frontenac was the Charlevoix and used since 1962 until it became the Frontenac. Amherst Island is the one getting a brand new ferry since 1954 when they got their brand new Amherst Islander 2. This one is actually the 4. Okay, this is the first time that's ever been spoken. But the Amherst Islander 2 came in 1954, and then they've had the Frontenac. No, let me back up on that. The Amherst Islander 2 was the 3. There was a tank landing craft renovated for a ferry for 3 years. And then the Amherst Islander 3, which is now in Honduras, still a ferry down in the Caribbean, operating. And she is an awful good boat. She is a very good sea boat. I've been out in the middle of Lake Ontario with her and some real bad stuff. Anyway.
A couple more questions. You by any chance know the fate of the Wolfe Islander 3? I think that she's still going to be in service.
Oh, I believe so. I'm not qualified nor cleared to speculate on future operation. I believe there'll probably be 2 boats. I don't know. But there's room. The docks are designed to handle, the Wolfe Islander 3 can go almost anywhere, including Amherst Island as backup, Wolfe Island. Pretty much one ferry can do it all is the general consensus.
And any idea how long it took to get to Wolfe Island on the paddle steamer ferry?
She did 10 knots. Wolfe Islander 3 does 10 and a half. They both, they're both the same speed.
All right. Do you know any idea of how the paid fare what was deleted rather? Why it never came. Charging for the fare for passage.
When they were putting fares up. I'm not going to get into politics. Mike Harris said,
you can take that conversation offline.
Yeah. Now, the reason the ferry became free was Bridge Appeasement in 1964. And it was a political promise because the highways were Ontario highways. So it would cost less, in my little minimal understanding, to operate a boat than build a bridge. And that's how it went. Until one day, no, you are going to pay. Well, that's another 2-hour talk.
There's one last question, and then there we go. Last question was why the ferries needed to be towed by tugboats. I expect that's to navigate through the ice.
Oh, when they were coming. Oh, okay. Tugboat here in Kingston. Yes, Wolfe Islander just bogged down, and once the Department of Highways in 1964 took over, they supplied the tug, and the contract was she went on the tow line, and service was almost guaranteed. It was just to try and stop ice travel. It wasn't safe. The ice has always been risky, but I didn't want to get into the Murphy tragedy of recent years to me, when the ice travel stopped. That was the end of it. People were taking chances, and the ice road was not the same, and the skilled guys were simply not around anymore to tell you no. And like my grandmother said, we had no boat in those days. You had to, if you needed to get across, you had to cross.
All right. Well, thank you very much again, Brian. That was a wonderful presentation. I certainly learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone had a great time reminiscing through their own voyages and learning a lot of new things about the boats and the stories from and to Wolfe Island. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. The next one, as I said at the beginning, is actually in a month's time on the 9th of March, and is with Scott Berthelette from Queen's University, who's going to be talking about La Vérendrye and the search for the Western Sea. So stepping a little farther back in time than Brian started this evening, but should be a very exciting presentation. Please check it out on our website. I would also like to let you know that we are having a public information session tomorrow evening at 6:30. It's completely free to register, but it's an information session about a project that Queen's University engineering students have been putting together about the possible restoration of our East Pier and what that might entail. So I invite you to take a look, and we'd love to hear your feedback. You can check that out on our website at marmuseum.ca. Under at the museum, there's a museum events page. Please check it out there, and you can register online. Thank you again so much for joining us. I'll keep you apprised as to whether or not we return to an in-person delivery on the 9th of March. But regardless, we will be doing a live stream portion as well for those of you joining from out of town. Please don't feel like you're gonna miss out. Thank you again, and if you have any other questions, please feel free to email them to our email address that I provided in the chat. Talk soon, stay well, and stay safe. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.